A man in China dreams he is Jesus' brother and leads a religious uprising against the Qing dynasty, resulting in one of history's deadliest conflicts. Let's break that down. The man in question was Hung-Siu-tshuen, a failed scholar whose commitment and charisma saw him rise from obscurity to the kingship of a theocratic state, with a population of almost 30 million. Of course, one individual does not make a rebellion. The Taiping story was shaped by several colourful characters, from true believers to cunning opportunists who built their authority through religious trickery. That's to say nothing of their Qing adversaries, who are often neglected in most retellings of these events. And yet, it is true that all of this can be traced back to one moment, a series of delusions experienced during a mental breakdown. How this developed into a fully fledged religious movement with millions of adherents can tell us a lot about how charisma and historical circumstance can allow new ideas to take root, steering the course of history. Chinese history up to this point is littered with tales of rebellion and civil war, dynasties rising and falling. But the Taiping represented something new. For the first time, China faced a domestic uprising shaped by foreign ideas. Adapted to suit the Chinese context, yes, but still alien enough to represent a revolutionary agenda. Because this was more than just a rebellion. The Taiping leaders presented an alternative way of organising society, one which, until it appeared, would have been hard for most of China to envisage. In this way, the Taiping exposed the weakness in the existing order, setting in motion its eventual decline. Though the true number of lives lost in the conflict is impossible to know with any degree of certainty, estimates are consistently above 20 million. Representing somewhere between 5 and 10% of China's population at that time. This makes the Taiping Rebellion one of the most destructive wars to have ever been fought, eclipsing better-known conflicts such as the First World War. A decade and a half of bitter fighting left entire regions depopulated, cities reduced to rubble, vast swathes of the countryside ruined or deserted. When talking about religious innovations, utopian visions, and the radical reorganisation of societies, it is important not to lose sight of the fact that this was a personal catastrophe for millions of people, that the Taiping flame burned so bright because of the lives it consumed. Its enduring legacy then is one of trauma, creating the furnace in which modern China would be forged. China in the 19th century was ruled by the Qing, an imperial dynasty hailing from the northeastern region of Manchuria. Over the course of the 17th century, the ethnically Manchu Qing had spread their control across China, ousting the Han Chinese Ming dynasty. As rulers, the Manchu segregated themselves from China's other ethnic groups, whilst also excluding non-Manchus from important political positions and forcing all men to wear the traditional Manchu hairstyle on pain of death, which was harsh. Such policies did little to endear them to the non-Manchu majority, many of whom came to see the Qing as foreign occupiers whose dominance represented an affront to national pride. By the early 1800s, the Qing regime was beginning to show signs of weakness. For starters, corruption was rife in both the military and the civil bureaucracy. The Qing army had fallen into a state of disrepair, with low morale, undermanned units, and a lack of investment in proper equipment, sapping it of its potency as a fighting force. Meanwhile, in the countryside, overtaxation and high rents were starting to become a real problem, forcing more and more peasant farmers to sell their land to the gentry elite. These elites enjoyed certain privileges when it came to taxation, meaning the more land they owned, the greater the burden on the remaining farmers. With the cost of farming becoming so expensive, many farmers turned to banditry, contributing to a state of insecurity in the Chinese countryside. In response, villagers began taking matters into their own hands by forming local militias, thereby undermining the government's monopoly of military power. China had experienced similar issues during the autumn years of previous imperial dynasties, but for the 19th century Qing, a new element complicating the situation was the growing presence of Western powers. Trade between China and Europe had long been characterized by China's lack of interest in European goods, leaving Europe's merchants with no choice but to pay for popular Chinese exports like tea, silk and porcelain with silver. This worked out great for the Chinese, less so for the Europeans. Seeking a more favourable balance of trade, in the late 18th century the British East India Company began illegally exporting opium from India into China. Opium addiction spread through China like a plague, doing great harm to the fabric of Chinese society. This growing epidemic also had economic repercussions. You see, financial transactions in this era were conducted using either copper or silver, with everyday payments being made in copper and taxes being paid in silver. With the balance of trade now reversed, the outflow of silver to pay for opium imports meant that silver became rarer and thus more valuable. This was a problem for Chinese farmers, who earned in the less valuable copper but paid their taxes in the more valuable silver, effectively pushing their taxes even higher. Given the scale of these challenges, it was vital that the Qing retain the support of the scholar gentry. These were the elites I mentioned earlier, whose membership was determined by merit rather than ancestry. At least in theory anyway. All state officials came from this class, though most scholar gentry did not work for the imperial government, instead remaining in their home provinces, where they took on the duties of local governance, without direction from the state. Entry into this privileged social class was determined by a series of examinations, designed to test candidates on their knowledge of Confucian teachings, these being the ideological foundation of Chinese governance, morality, and social hierarchy. As imperial dynasties came and went, the scholar gentry endured, ensuring the preservation of the Confucian social order. The influence of this educated elite meant they had the potential to challenge the imperial dynasty if left unmanaged. One of the ways the Qing sought to do this was by editing the content of the examinations through which one attained scholar gentry status, placing greater emphasis on the Confucian teachings that promoted loyalty to the dynasty. The number of candidates that passed these examinations was also restricted, so that the scholar gentry class remained a manageable size. As a result, the pass rate was very low. For instance, in the southern city of Guangzhou, roughly 1,000 candidates took part each year, with only 12 allowed to pass. If one was successful in these exams, not only would they advance into the most privileged social class, granting them wealth and influence, but they would also bring honour to their family, their village and their ancestors. On the other hand, failure would bring a lifetime of wondering what could have been. In the early 1830s, one young man with dreams of attaining such distinction was Hung-Siu-tshuen. Born on the 1st of January 1814, Hong grew up in a village 30 miles north of Guangzhou. He, like the rest of his village, belonged to the Hakka ethnic group. The Hakkas were a people from central China who had migrated south only a few centuries earlier. As a result, the local Chinese population, also known as the Punti, referred to them as guest people. By the time the Hakkas arrived in southern China, all the best land had been taken, meaning the Hakkas had been forced to settle in mountainous and less fertile areas. Disputes with their Punti neighbours were common, earning the Hakka a reputation as quarrelsome but also as brave fighters. As a child, the young Hong showed great promise and soon became the focus of his family's hopes of social improvement. He first travelled to Guangzhou to take the imperial examination as an adolescent, but was unsuccessful. With his family unable to continue supporting his studies, Hong returned to his village to work the fields. In time, Hong would take up a position as a teacher at a local school, and he would spend the next few years preparing for a second attempt at the imperial examinations. His opportunity would come in 1836, when Hung returned to Guangzhou, filled with hope and confidence. It would be on this visit that he'd have an interaction that would change his life, sparking a series of events that would forever alter the course of Chinese history. One day, as he was walking by the hall where the examinations were to take place, Hung came across a foreigner and his Chinese interpreter addressing passers-by. Intrigued, Hung approached the two men and asked them questions. After answering each of Hung's queries, the foreigner, with the help of his interpreter, promised Hung, "You will attain the highest rank, but do not be grieved, for grief will make you sick." The next day, Hung encountered the two men once more. This time, Hung was given a book, a collection of biblical essays written by one Liang Fa, an ordained minister notable for being the second Chinese person to convert to Protestant Christianity. The story of Christianity in modern China began with Jesuit missionaries in the 16th century. The Jesuits made reasonable progress spreading the faith until 1724, when the emperor prescribed the religion, expelling all foreign missionaries. Despite this, Christianity maintained an underground presence. As trade with Western powers picked up towards the end of the 18th century, the Chinese coast saw a new influx of Christian missionaries, with Protestants first arriving on the scene in 1807. These missionaries faced considerable obstacles, as Westerners were not allowed to set foot outside of certain designated areas. On top of that, practicing and spreading the Christian faith remained an illegal act. In 1836, the same year Hung took his second stab at the imperial exams, Guangzhou officials felt the need to crack down upon this foreign religion, giving the city's residents 6 months to hand in any Christian books in their possession. But the missionaries were not to be deterred. Some took to sailing up and down the coast, handing out Bibles as they went, whilst entrance into a city like Guangzhou could be secured with a few well-placed bribes. This presumably is how the missionary Hung encountered was able to get inside the city's walls. By the 1830s, the number of Christians in China was probably somewhere north of 200,000, almost all of whom were Catholics. How much the young Hung knew of this foreign religion is impossible to say, though one imagines not very much. Either way, the book failed to capture his attention. After failing the examination for a second time, Hung returned to his village, whereupon he stored the book away somewhere in his house, all but forgetting about its existence. The following year, Hung headed back to Guangzhou to try again for a third time. Again, he was unsuccessful. This time, the disappointment was too much to bear. Feeling too unwell to make the long walk back to his village, Hung paid for 2 men to carry him home in a sedan chair. When he arrived, he was immediately confined to his bed, too weak to move. Believing he was about to die, Hung bade farewell to his wife and parents, lamenting his own failures. He then closed his eyes. In the darkness, Hung hears music. His eyes open, and he sees a tiger, a cockerel, and a dragon enter his bedroom. They are followed by men playing musical instruments, whilst other men appear carrying a sedan chair. Hung gets out of bed and takes a seat, and the men carry him away. Shortly thereafter, he arrives at his destination. There, Hung is met by a group of old men, who slice open his body with a knife, removing his heart and organs and replacing them with new ones. With that done, an old woman approaches him. She leads Hung down to a river and proceeds to wash him. As she does so, she tells him, "Your body is soiled from your descent into the world. Let your mother cleanse you in the river, after which you can go to see your father." Once he is fully cleaned, Hung is led into a large hall. There, sitting high above him, is an old man with a golden beard, dressed in a black robe adorned with dragons, a sign of imperial authority. Hung recognizes this man as his heavenly father. Upon seeing Hung, tears form in his father's eyes, and he begins to speak. Pay close attention to what I say. Many of those on earth have lost their original natures. Which of those people on earth did I not give life to? Which of them has not received my blessing? Have they no respect for me? It is the demon devils who have led them astray. People have no inkling as to how these demon devils will snare and destroy them, nor can they understand the extent of my anger and my pity. Hong's heavenly father then shows Hong the depravity and vice of the world below, all the product of the demon devil's evil doings. Worse still, his father informs him that the demon devils have breached the gates of heaven. Distressed by this news, Hong asks permission to wage war against these demonic intruders. His father grants this wish, gifting him a sword and a golden seal with which he may overcome the evil spirits. He is also introduced to a middle-aged man, who Hong calls his elder brother, and together they do battle against the demons. As he cuts his way through the demon horde, Hong's adversaries are transforming before his eyes. One moment they take the form of serpents, then they are a flock of birds, then lions. There are moments when Hong gets weary, and the women of heaven give him sweet-tasting yellow fruits to restore his energy. In the end, he is successful in his efforts, driving the demons out of heaven and down to earth. With the battle won, Hong spends some time with his heavenly wife and newborn son. But the job isn't finished. Hong must return to Earth, where the demon's power has not waned and evil spirits still fester. Before he departs, Hong's heavenly father gives him one last gift, a new name. The problem is that the first character of Hong's given name, Huo, means fire and is therefore taboo. In its place, his father tells him to use the name Chuen, meaning complete. And so, Hong acquires a name by which history will remember him, Hung-Siu-tshuen. With that, he says farewell to his heavenly family, descending back down into the earthly realm to cleanse that world of its lingering evils. Or so Hong claimed. Whilst Hong was off in heaven fighting demons, his earthly family were watching over him with growing concern. When awake, Hong would be jumping around his room, waving his arms as if he were wielding a sword, shouting about slashing demons. There were moments when Hong could be heard singing to himself, and there were moments when he could be heard crying. At one point, Hong left his bedroom and sought out his earthly father, telling him, "The venerable old man has commanded that all men should turn to me, and all treasure flow to me." From then on, he started referring to himself as the Emperor of China. Out in the village, it began to be whispered that Hong had lost his mind. His family, fearing he might have been possessed, brought an exorcist to their house, but Hong angrily sent the man away. Eventually, after about 40 days of madness and chaos, Hong started to settle down, to his family's relief. But something about the young man had changed. Besides the new name, which they soon came to accept, those close to Hong began noticing how his movements were now more measured, his disposition friendlier, his mind more open to new ideas. The next few years of Hong's life would be uneventful, with his focus split between teaching at the local school and studying for his fourth attempt at the imperial examinations. At no point did he abandon the belief that there was some sort of meaning behind his visions. But with no way of knowing exactly what that was, Hong had no choice but to get on with his life. Little did he know, the key that would decode his heavenly adventures was sitting there on his bookshelf, just waiting to be rediscovered.